Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at Beyond the Book with Julie, the Julie Chan Show. So excited to be here with Christina McDonald today. Christina, welcome.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here.
Yeah, it's so great. I love that we can do this social media format where you are
Yeah,
in London and I am in Los Angeles.
yeah.
How
It's
is
been
the
a
weather there?
lifesaver.
Is it freezing cold there?
It's not too cold. London's a bit like Seattle, where it just is very rainy all winter. It just rains the whole time.
Right. You went from one rainy place clear across the pond to another
Yeah,
rainy place.
I did. I went from Seattle to Ireland, which is also very rainy, to London, which just, I don't know. And I love the sun. I really want the sun, but I guess something in me just yearns for the rain.
The sun is inside you. You have a gorgeous smile. So you
Oh, thank you.
so you grew up in Seattle and
Yes.
then college took you to Ireland and
Yeah.
and you stayed and never came back.
Yeah, well, I did my undergraduate degree at the University of Washington, which is in Seattle. And when I finished, I went traveling because it was right after 9/11. So I was like, oh, well, what should I do? There's no jobs in journalism, which is the degree that I'd gotten. So I saved up some money, worked for a bit, and then I went traveling and I ended up in Ireland. And I found a town there that had a really great university, and I decided to apply for the master's degree in journalism there, and I got in and I got accepted. And so I moved there, like within just a few months I got accepted, and I packed up all my stuff and I moved across the world and ended up in Ireland. And while I was there, I met my future husband. So we got married, and then after that we moved to London, and we've been in London ever since.
How wonderful. Do you ever
Yeah.
miss the United States or
Oh yeah.
Seattle?
Yeah, definitely. My mom and my sisters and my brother are still in Seattle, so I before the pandemic would go out every other year to make sure and see them, and I miss them so much. And there's so many great things about America that I miss, like driving. I miss the big wide roads. In
Right.
England, the roads are really tiny and narrow, and you have to and it's just crazy. So yeah, there's a lot of things that I miss all the time.
I'm sure. And do you drive there in London?
Yeah, I drive. I drive on the left-hand side of the road.
Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds
Yeah.
really scary to me, but I guess you get used
Yeah.
to it. You've been there a
Well, I
long
took a
time.
course and got my license. Like I went through it,
Yeah.
taking driving lessons and whatever, because it was really scary to drive on the left-hand side of the road, but the right-hand side of the car, I was just like, I can't do it all.
Right, right. Especially
Yeah.
when you've done it another way for so long.
Yeah. But you know what? When I dream, I still dream that I'm driving on the right-hand side of the road, which is interesting because I've been driving on the left-hand side of the road for most of my adult life now.
That is a really specific in your dreams
Yeah.
that you're
Yeah.
dreaming about driving. You
I've
must be
noticed it a few
driving on
times.
the other side of the road. I don't even remember my dreams at all. So that's like really fascinating to me that you would remember such a specific detail.
Yeah.
Let's get to your book. This is your
Yeah.
third book. Do
Third one.
It is centered largely around drug use. Did you have
Yeah.
to do a lot of research? Was there some kind of drug use, in your life or someone you knew over the years?
Yeah. So, I mean, my brother has suffered from addiction for most of my adult life. So, that's been a huge driving force between choosing to set this book against the backdrop of the opioid epidemic. So, I've known I wanted to do that for a long time. The book is not in any way non-fictional. It does not have my brother as a character. It's not about that at all. It is a completely fictional, plot-driven story that just happens to be set against the backdrop of the opioid epidemic. But definitely the fact that, I've for so many years watched my brother's struggle, that's definitely changed my opinion and my emotions and how I feel about the opioid epidemic. It's changed my thoughts, and I have a lot of strong feelings, and I wanted to definitely be able to explore those amidst the pages of this thriller. And so one day I was reading a news story about a podiatrist who'd set up an opioid ring, a podiatrist in Indiana. He'd set up an opioid ring, And I was like, why would you do that? So I started researching it a bit more, and I found out that there were tons of doctors that were doing this for a really long time, doctors and nurse practitioners and dentists. It became like a thing. Just a lot of people in positions of power had set up opioid rings to sell to people who were addicted. And I thought, like, why would you do that when our country is obviously suffering? So I started thinking about it and motivations of, well, maybe this podiatrist needed money, or maybe it was status. He wanted to feel great about himself, and I couldn't get behind any of those. I was like, nope, nope, nope. And then I thought the only motivation that I could understand, given I'd watched my brother and his struggle with addiction, was love. I would do anything for my children. So I wanted to juxtapose that moral question, like, would you go that far for someone you love? Do the ends justify the means? Right. And so I did do a lot of research about the whole opioid epidemic, and also about the medical field around leukemia, because the child in my book has a rare form of leukemia. So I had to do a lot of research for that. I read medical journals, and I found out about the different types of treatments that there are. And a lot of that went into my book. And then I had a doctor read the story to make sure that everything was totally authentic. So yeah, there was a lot of research in this one, but also a lot of personal things went into it as well, personal emotions and anecdotes and things like that. But it is entirely fictional.
Well, when you say personal anecdotes, I think the reader's always very curious about how to connect with the author through the fictional story. And so when you say personal anecdotes, are you referring to, some of the things hit close to home because you understand what it's like being close to somebody with an addiction?
For sure. There's definitely that sort of vibe throughout the book where I say, for example, I know that when somebody has been addicted for a long time and they go through rehab, afterwards they can feel quite intense anxiety. And, it's part of that withdrawal. And people exhibit anxiety in different ways. So I had the brother who has suffered from addiction in my book. He also, when he's anxious, he pulls out his eyebrow hair. So he has like bald patches. So that knowledge went into creating my characters. It's nothing specific that my brother has done, or really actually anybody I know, but it's just these little things that I know do happen go into building my characters.
Right. Was there ever a point in your research and going so deep into, the drugs and the leukemia that you would kind of go dark and think like, wait, why am I writing this? Was there ever one of those
I never really reached that point. I mean, this book flowed out of me so fast. I had such a strong connection to it. So while I did a number of months of research beforehand, which I don't typically have to do as much research, while I did loads of research ahead of time, once I sat down to write it, it just flowed out of me. It was 3 months to the day. I wrote the whole first draft. It just really flowed. Like I connected with it. I knew that my main character was going to be an anti-hero, and that she was going to be doing some bad things for a good reason. And I knew that I wanted my reader to, at the end of the book, decide, it's not up to me as an author to decide, but the reader to decide if the things that she does justify everything she did. So I knew all of that before I sat down to write the book. And I think it meant that I just, I connected with it. Yeah. So I never really felt like I went into like a dark place while I was writing it or anything like that. No.
It just came to you.
It just came out.
And how many months did the research take?
The research took about 3 months, I think. I'm trying to remember because it was quite a few years ago now that I did the research, but yeah, about 3 months. And it was quite technical. So I kept documents and documents and documents of all of the different stuff and tried to figure out like, how could I work this into a plot? Because you don't want a plot to be bogged down with all that technical information. But for example, I found out that the treatment that the little boy Josh receives for his cancer is it's called CAR T cell immunotherapy, and it is a real treatment, and it does actually cost about $400,000 to $500,000, and it isn't covered by insurance because it hasn't yet been FDA approved. So that definitely showed up after all of my research. That showed up as a plot, part of my plot. So all of that research, just it definitely showed up, because if you have a child who needs if your child needs a treatment that costs that much and you can't afford to pay it, how far will you go to get that money? So the research was really good for this one, and definitely very needed. And I'm glad that I spent those months doing it. But the writing itself only took me about 3 months. So 6 months in all for a first draft. Of course, there's a bazillion drafts after that.
That's incredible, though. So are you doing research now for your next book?
So it took me a lot longer to write my next book, because I've also been homeschooling during the pandemic. I've been homeschooling my kids, and it's impossible to create when you have small children. And you're trying to homeschool them and
And how
teach
many
them math.
children do you have?
I have two. I have a 7-year-old and a 12-year-old.
Oh,
And the 12-year-old, he can kind of manage himself, but my 7-year-old definitely needs kind of guidance, like top level guidance. So I realized that I was going to have to start waking up really early in the morning and just carve out my own little corner of peace in order to write. So that book took me about 5 months to write a first draft, just a basic first draft. And I did some research as and when I wrote it. I didn't actually research ahead of time for this one. I think every book calls for something different, like Behind Every Lie, I didn't really need that much research, whereas The Night Olivia Fell and this one, I definitely needed to do more research in order to know what I could work into the plot and how it was going to create tension in the plot, and for my characters as well. But for my next one, I haven't really had to do that much. And I have done some, but any of it has happened while I'm writing. So I'll write something and then I'll go, actually, I need to know more about that. And I'll hop off and go online and do some research. And then I'll go, and I'll come back and write. And it's just my process.
For this next book, what was the seed that germinated the story?
So I can't really talk much about my next book because I'm still in edits, and I've given it to my agent. It's still at such an early stage that I'm not really allowed to talk about it. But when I sat down to write it, it was at the beginning of the pandemic, and I was I don't know about you, but at the beginning, my brain just felt fried from I think constantly being bombarded with all the news and the doom and gloom. And it was just a lot going on, and my kids were around all the time. So it just felt like a really crazy time. It was hard to get my brain to just be quiet and focus. So I didn't have a story idea when I sat down to write the story. I had 2 words, kidneys and sisters. And I just sat down and I wrote.
What, kidneys and sisters, did that just come to you when you sat down, or you were doing laundry and managing your kids and you kept seeing those 2 words?
I think I've wanted to write a book about these things for quite a while, and the words were just kind of bopping around in my head, and then I sat down to write, and that's just kind of where the story led me. This sounds really crazy, but when I have an idea for a story, it's kind of like an aura of the idea comes on me. It's not really fully formed. It's nothing concrete that I could give an elevator pitch or say anything about it. It's kind of just more like a sensation. You know what I mean? Like an aura. Right. And so I just had a kind of an aura, and I sat down and I wrote the story, and that was the way I went. And every day I showed up for those 2 or 3 hours. And by the end of those months, those words had all added up, and then I had a story. So hopefully we'll see where it goes. We'll see what happens, but hopefully there will be a next book. Fingers crossed.
That is very exciting. It's fascinating to hear how, how stories come to you. How
yeah.
You start with words, and then they just populate into many, many, many more words.
Many more words. Little drops in the ocean.
That is wonderful. And I love that you are so disciplined and were able to carve out your own time while homeschooling.
Yeah, I am a really disciplined person. When I want something, that's it. I go for it.
Wow. Good for you. That is incredible. Now, are you involved in any writing groups?
I'm not. No, I mean, I have like a few writing groups and we talk about publishing things, but I don't ever give my first chapters or even my first draft to anybody at all. I don't, because I think the opinions are so subjective. I
Right.
send my book directly to my agent. So as soon as I have finished it to the best of my ability, I send it to my agent, and then my agent weighs in and we make some edits and we do changes, and I work for another few months. And then when that is completely done, and she feels like it's the best that we can do, then we send it out to my editor.
Incredible. That is great. Really great. I love hearing about your working style and how these ideas come to you. And this is an amazing book, Do No Harm, right
Thank
behind you
you.
right here, and a beautiful cover. Did you imagine that that cover would look that way?
This is the finished cover, and I love it because the words, you can't probably can't really see it on the screen, but the words are embossed, and I love it. I have nothing really to do with the cover. That's up to the art department.
Right.
But when I saw it, I loved it because they have this really nice in the very background here. You can see the abandoned warehouse, which really shows up very prevalently throughout the book. So I love that. I love that it kind of takes like a snapshot of the book, like a scene in the book, and really shows that suspenseful moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Do no harm. Definite suspense.
Yeah.
And you love the thriller suspense genre of writing. That's where all of
Yeah.
your books have been.
They're
Did you
all
always,
there.
did you always imagine that your books, that you would write books in suspense and thriller?
No, it's kind of funny how I ended up writing my first book, The Night Olivia Fell. When I first wrote it, it it didn't start off necessarily as a suspense book, and in fact the books that I wrote prior to that weren't necessarily suspense or mystery. I kind of roamed around genres, and I when I was younger I wrote, well, I was a journalist. I was a trained journalist, so I wrote facts, and then in my spare time I would do poetry and sometimes romance, and just I roamed around. But then when I sat down to write The Night Olivia Fell, just by the nature of the story that I wanted to tell, it ended up being suspense. And the more I edited and kind of fine-tuned everything, the more it really dug into that genre. And then I realized, actually, this is the genre I really want to write in. But it was kind of, I just stumbled across it, like as I was writing, because of the inherent nature of that story. I stumbled across that, and I loved it. And I think that makes sense because it's what I read. So of course that's what I write.
I see.
I should have figured that out earlier.
So this is your favorite genre to read, and
Yeah.
then you enjoy writing it
Yeah. Yeah.
on your terms.
Yeah.
That's great. Great. Well, so much fun to be with you today.
Oh,
Really
thank you.
interesting to hear about your backstory. Thank you for sharing with us.
Yeah.
Great to be with you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here Beyond the Book with Julie, the Julie Chan Show. Thank you, Christina McDonald. Do No
Thank
Harm is her latest book.
you.